Captain Lee Dae-ho stared at the massive alien ship through the bridge window of the U's Harmony. The ship was 3 times bigger than his own vessel, and covered in strange glowing panels that pulsed with purple light. He had never seen anything like it in his 20 years of space travel. "Sir, they're sending us a message," said Lieutenant Kim Tae-sung from his position at the communications console. His voice was steady, but Lee could see sweat on the young man's forehead. "Put it through," Lee ordered. He straightened his uniform and prepared to make humanity's first contact with alien life. The main screen flickered, and a face appeared that made several crew members gasp. The alien looked like a giant insect with 4 red eyes and mandibles that clicked when it spoke. Its voice came through the ship's speakers in perfect human language. "Primitive vessel, you have entered space controlled by the hegemony of Stellar. Dominions, I am Commander Ixthival of the Vorthic species. State your purpose or be destroyed." Lee stepped forward. "I am Captain Lee Dae-ho of the United Earthship Harmony. We come in peace, seeking diplomatic contact with your people." The alien's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter. "Earth? We have no record of this world in our databases. You must be a very young species to have only now achieved faster-than-light travel." Commander Park So-min, who stood beside. Lee whispered, "Sir, our sensors show their weapons are charging." Lee nodded slightly, but kept his eyes on the screen. "We are indeed new to space travel beyond our solar system. We hope to learn from more advanced civilizations like yours." "Advanced?" Commander Ixthival's 4 eyes seemed to focus on Lei with new interest. "Show us your weapon systems. We must evaluate your technology before we can proceed." Lee hesitated. He knew the Harmony carried only basic railguns and nuclear missiles, primitive compared to what he was seeing on the alien vessel. But refusing might be seen as hostile. "Our weapons are simple by your standards," Lee said carefully. "We use projectile weapons and nuclear devices." The alien made a sound that was definitely laughter this time. "Projectiles? Nuclear fission? How quaint. We have not seen such primitive technology in over 1,000 years." The creature leaned forward on the screen. "You fire solid objects at your enemies?" "Yes," Lee replied, trying to keep his dignity intact. "And these nuclear devices? They split atoms for energy?" "That's correct." Commander Ixthival turned away from the screen and spoke to someone off camera in a language that sounded like clicking and buzzing. When he turned back, his expression had changed to something that looked like pity. "Captain Lee, your species is like a child playing with sticks while adults wield the power of stars. Our plasma cannons can melt through any armor your technology could create. Our quantum disruptors can tear apart matter at the molecular level. Your projectile weapons would be like throwing pebbles at a mountain." Lee felt anger rising in his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. "Perhaps you would allow us to demonstrate our capabilities?" "There is no need," the alien said dismissively. "We have scanned your vessel thoroughly. Your most powerful weapon has an energy output of approximately 50 terajoules. Our smallest defensive turret produces energy in the petajoule range. The difference is comparable to a candle flame versus a volcano." Commander Park stepped forward. "Sir, perhaps we should—" "Wait," Lee interrupted. He had an idea that might save them from this humiliating encounter. "Commander Ixthival, while our weapons may seem primitive, there is something you might not understand about humans." "And what would that be?" "We don't always measure power the same way you do." The alien's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. "Explain." Lee looked around his bridge at his crew. Kim Tae-sung was still sweating, but had not left his post. Park So-min stood ready for whatever orders he might give. Chief Engineer Oh Min-ho had appeared on the bridge without being called, probably sensing trouble. These people would follow him anywhere, even into certain death. "You measure power in energy output," Lee said slowly. "We measure it in determination." Determination is not quantifiable, Commander Ixthival replied. It cannot stop plasma bolts or penetrate quantum shields. Perhaps not, Lee agreed. But it can make someone keep fighting when logic says they should surrender. The alien was silent for a moment. Then he spoke again, and his tone had changed slightly. You interest me, Captain Lee. The hegemony has rules about new species. You must submit to our authority and accept status as a protectorate world. Your planet will provide resources and labor in exchange for our protection. And if we refuse, then we will demonstrate why 12 species bow to our will. Your world will be sterilized, and your people will become a footnote in galactic history. Lee felt his crew tense around him. This was the moment he had dreaded since leaving Earth. Humanity's first contact with alien life was turning into a demand for surrender. I need time to consult with my government, Lee said. You have 1 standard hour, Commander Ixthival replied. Lower your shields and prepare to be boarded for inspection. Any resistance will be met with immediate destruction. The screen went. Black Dot Lee turned to his crew. Options? Sir, Kim Tae-sung said quietly. I've been monitoring their communications. They're treating us like we're already defeated. They've called for additional ships to escort us back to Earth. How many additional ships? Park asked. 12, sir. A full battle group. Oh Minho spoke up from where he stood near the engineering console. Captain, I've been studying their ship during the conversation. Their shields are impressive, but they're designed to stop energy weapons. I'm not sure how they'd handle kinetic projectiles at high velocity. You're suggesting we fight? Lee asked. I'm suggesting we show them what determination looks like. Oh replied. Lee looked around his bridge again. 37 crew members on a single ship, facing an alien empire that controlled 12 species across the galaxy. The smart thing to do would be to surrender and hope for mercy. But as he looked at the faces of his crew, Lee realized that surrender was not really an option. Not for humans. Not when their entire species was at stake. Kim, send a message to Earth. Tell them what we've encountered and that we're going to attempt to break free. Sir? Kim's voice was uncertain. Then charge all weapons and prepare for evasive maneuvers. Captain, Park said urgently, we can't possibly win against their technology. Lee smiled grimly. You're right, Commander. We can't win with technology. But maybe we can win with something they don't understand. He sat down in his captain's chair and gripped the armrests tightly. Let's show them how humans fight. Dr. Yoon Ji-hai stood in the observation deck of the transport ship, watching the massive artificial world grow larger through the viewport. The crucible was unlike anything humanity had ever built. It was a perfect sphere, twice the size of Earth's moon, covered in gleaming metal structures that reached up like fingers toward space. Impressive, isn't it? Admiral Choi Byung-ho joined her at the window. His weathered face showed no emotion, but Ji-hai could see tension in his shoulders. It's terrifying, she replied honestly. They built an entire world just to test other species. What kind of civilization has that much power to spare? 3 months had passed since Captain Lee's encounter with the Hegemony Patrol. His desperate gambit had worked, barely. The Harmony's railguns had somehow penetrated the alien shields, causing enough damage to make the Vorthic commander retreat. But instead of invasion, humanity had received something unexpected, an invitation. The Hegemony wanted to test them. Ji-hai had spent those 3 months studying everything they knew about the 12 species that ruled the galaxy. Each one was more advanced than the last. The crystalline Nexari could focus stellar energy into weapons that burned at temperatures found in star cores. The gaseous Veltar manipulated gravity itself, creating black holes and spatial distortions. The mechanical Keth had replaced their organic bodies with technology that could survive in the vacuum of space. Dr. Yoon, Admiral Choi said quietly, Tell me again what you learned about their testing methods. Ji-Hai turned away from the window. Every species they've encountered has been ranked by the same criteria: maximum, destructive capability, and defensive strength. The stronger you are, the higher your status in the hegemony. The weaker species become servant races. And where do they expect us to rank? Dead last, Ji-Hai said bluntly. Our weapons are primitive by their standards. Our ships are slow. Our technology is thousands of years behind theirs. By every measure they use, we should be begging for the lowest servant status just to survive. Admiral Choi nodded slowly. Good thing we don't play by their rules. The transport ship docked with the Crucible 6 hours later. As the human delegation walked through the airlock, they entered a world that defied imagination. The interior of the artificial planet was hollow, with gravity generators creating multiple levels of surface area. Structures hung in the air without visible support. Light came from panels that seemed to exist in the walls themselves. Welcome, humans, to the trials of ascension. The voice came from a creature that looked like it was made of living crystal. Light passed through its body, creating rainbow patterns that shifted as it moved. This was their first glimpse of an Ixari. I am Resonance of Truth, speaker for the Testing Council. You will demonstrate your species' capabilities across 3 trials. Your performance will determine your place in the Galactic Order. Admiral Choi stepped forward. We're honored by this opportunity. The crystal being's light patterns shifted in what might have been amusement. Honor is irrelevant. Only strength matters here. They were led to a vast amphitheater where representatives from all 12 hegemony species waited. Ji-Hai had seen pictures, but experiencing them in person was overwhelming. The Vorthic delegates looked like giant insects. The Zephyrians resembled metallic serpents. The Omnirai were pure energy beings contained in force field bodies. At the center of the amphitheater stood a massive asteroid, held in place by gravity fields. The first trial is simple, Resonance of Truth announced. Demonstrate your maximum destructive capability. Each species will show their most powerful weapon. The Nexari went first. 5 of the crystal beings formed a circle around the asteroid and began to glow. The light grew brighter and brighter until Ji-Hai had to shield her eyes. When the brilliance faded, the asteroid was gone, completely vaporized. Solar fusion cannon, Resonance of Truth explained calmly. Temperature, 15 million degrees. Energy output, 100 petajoules. The Veltar representative was next. It was difficult to look at directly. A creature made of swirling gas and energy. It raised what might have been an arm, and space around the next asteroid began to bend and twist. A tiny black hole appeared, no bigger than a marble, but it consumed the entire asteroid in seconds before winking out of existence. Gravitational Singularity Projector, the Veltar, spoke in a voice like wind through caves, capable of creating localized black holes with controlled duration. Species after species demonstrated weapons that could destroy cities, level mountains, or crack continents. Each display was more devastating than the last. The watching aliens murmured approval at particularly impressive demonstrations. Finally, it was humanity's turn. Sergeant Oh Min-ho walked to the center of the amphitheater, carrying a standard human assault rifle. The weapon looked pathetically small compared to the massive energy, cannons and reality-warping devices they had just witnessed. Laughter erupted from several sections of the audience. The insectoid Vorthic were clicking their mandibles in amusement. Even some of the more reserved species seemed to be expressing humor in their own ways. Oh Min-ho ignored them. He raised his rifle and began firing at the test asteroid. The bullets struck the rock with small puffs of dust and fragments. Each impact was tiny compared to the spectacular destruction they had just witnessed. Is this some kind of joke? The voice came from a Keth delegate its mechanical body gleaming under the amphitheater lights. Oh Minho continued firing. His rifle kicked against his shoulder with each shot, but he held it steady. When the first magazine was empty, he reloaded without pause. The second magazine, then the third. Human, Resonance of Truth called out, "Your weapon appears to be malfunctioning. The asteroid remains intact." Oh Minho paused in his reloading to look up at the crystal being. "It's working fine. Then why do you continue this futile demonstration?" "Because I'm not done yet." Oh Minho resumed firing. By now, his rifle was growing hot from continuous use. The metal barrel began to glow faintly. Still, he kept shooting. The asteroid was pockmarked with bullet holes, but showed no signs of serious damage. Then something happened that made the laughter stop. The recoil from his overheating weapon was strong enough to break bones. Chi-Hai heard the sharp crack as Oh Minho's right arm snapped. She started to move toward him, but Admiral Choi held her back. Oh Minho switched the rifle to his left hand and kept firing. The amphitheater fell silent. 12 species that had ruled the galaxy for millennia watched in stunned disbelief as a human continued fighting with a broken arm. The rifle was glowing red-hot now, burning his hands through his gloves. The metal began to warp from the heat. Still, he fired. When the rifle finally melted beyond use, Oh Minho dropped it and drew his sidearm. The smaller weapon seemed insignificant, but he aimed carefully and continued shooting. His broken arm hung useless at his side. Burns covered his hands. But he did not stop. "The test is concluded," Resonance of Truth announced, but Oh Minho didn't seem to hear. Admiral Choi finally stepped forward and put a hand on the sergeant's shoulder. "That's enough, soldier." Oh Minho lowered his weapon and looked around the silent amphitheater. Blood dripped from his burned hands onto the floor. His right arm was bent at an unnatural angle, but his eyes were clear and focused. "Did I pass?" he asked. For the first time since the trials began, none of the alien representatives had an immediate answer. Resonance of Truth's crystal body pulsed with rapid light patterns. "Your weapon's energy output was approximately 50 terajoules. Total, the asteroid sustained minimal damage. By our measurement standards, this was the weakest demonstration we have recorded." Oh Minho nodded, as if this was exactly what he expected to hear. "However," the crystal being continued, and its voice carried a note of confusion, "your performance raises questions that we have never encountered before. Such as, why did you continue fighting when your weapon was clearly ineffective? Why did you not stop when injury made further combat illogical? Why did you not surrender when defeat was mathematically certain?" Oh Minho looked up at the towering alien representatives surrounding him. Because surrender wasn't an option. But continuation was futile. Maybe, Oh Minho agreed. But futile doesn't mean impossible. The alien delegates began speaking among themselves in their various languages. Clicks, buzzes, harmonic tones, and sounds that human ears couldn't properly process. Chi-Hai realized they were arguing about something, but she couldn't understand what. Finally, Resonance of Truth spoke again. "The testing council requires time to evaluate your performance. You will be assigned quarters while we deliberate." As the humans were escorted from the amphitheater, Chi-Hai heard one of the Keth delegates speaking to another. They showed no fear of pain or death. "How do you fight an enemy that doesn't recognize when it's beaten?" The other mechanical beings' response was barely audible. "You don't. You pray you never have to try." Sub-Admiral Kong Yun-Seo sat in her assigned quarters aboard the Crucible, surrounded by holographic displays showing human military history. The data she had gathered over the past week was disturbing in ways she hadn't expected. The hegemony Council had tasked her with understanding humanity's unusual behavior during the first trial. What she had discovered kept her awake at night. "Computer, display human conflict statistics," she said to the room's AI system. Numbers filled the air around her. In their short recorded history, humans had fought over 14,000 wars. They had survived ice ages, asteroid impacts, volcanic eruptions that blocked out their sun, and plagues that killed half their population. Most species would have gone extinct after any one of these disasters. Humans had survived them all and kept fighting each other. "Display survival adaptation patterns," she commanded. New data appeared. Humans were the only known species that had evolved to find hope in hopeless situations. Their brain chemistry actually produced stimulating drugs when faced with impossible odds. Other species fled or surrendered when defeat was certain. Humans got more dangerous. A chime sounded at her door. "Come in." Resonance of Truth entered, its crystal body dim with what she had learned indicated confusion or concern. "Have you completed your analysis?" the Nexari asked. "Yes," Yuncio replied. "And I recommend we abort the remaining trials immediately." "Explain." Yuncio gestured to the data surrounding them. "Every other species we've tested follows predictable patterns. They maximize their chances of survival. They retreat when outnumbered. They surrender when defeat is mathematically certain. This allows us to predict and control their behavior. And humans? Humans don't follow survival logic. They make decisions based on principles that override self-preservation. Look at this battle record. Thermopylae. 300 humans held off an army of hundreds of thousands. They knew they would die. They stayed anyway." Resonance of Truth's light patterns shifted. Interesting, but irrelevant. That was thousands of years ago. This was last week. Yuncio brought up a new display. "I intercepted their communications with Earth. When Captain Lee made first contact with our patrol, Earth's military began preparing for total war. Not negotiation, not surrender. They started building weapons they knew couldn't match ours, and training soldiers for a fight they couldn't win. That's illogical." "Exactly my point. They don't think like us." Every species in the hegemony joined because it was the logical choice. We offered them safety and prosperity in exchange for submission. Humans would rather die fighting than live kneeling. The crystal being was silent for a long moment. "The second trial begins tomorrow. We cannot stop the process now without losing face before the other species. Then we're making a mistake," Yuncio warned. The next morning, the amphitheater was filled again. The second trial was tactical combat. Each species had to defend a position against overwhelming odds using their standard military doctrine. The Vorthic went first. Their hive mind coordination was perfect. They calculated optimal defensive positions, established overlapping fields of fire, and maintained discipline until their simulated casualties reached 60%. Then they surrendered, as military logic dictated. The Nexari followed. Their crystal formations created impenetrable barriers of focused light. They held their position efficiently until the simulation determined their defeat was inevitable. They withdrew in good order, preserving their remaining forces for future battles. Species after species performed predictably. They fought well, used their advantages effectively, and surrendered when continued resistance became pointless. The watching delegates nodded approval at particularly clever tactical decisions. Then it was humanity's turn. Captain Najun-Sik led a team of 20 human soldiers into the simulation chamber. The scenario was simple: defend a strategic position against an attacking force of 200 enemies with superior weapons. And armor. The human team studied the battlefield for exactly 30 seconds. Then Captain Na did something that made the alien observers lean forward in surprise. He abandoned the defensive position entirely. "Human commander," Resonance of Truth called out, "you are supposed to defend the strategic point." I heard you, Na replied. But defense is a losing strategy here. We're going to attack instead. Attack? The crystal being's light patterns flashed rapidly. You are outnumbered 10-1. I can count, Na said. Move out. The human soldiers charged directly toward the enemy force. They didn't seek cover. They didn't try to use superior positions. They ran straight into the teeth of overwhelming firepower. It was insane, not private. Lim He-jin took a simulated plasma bolt to the chest that should have killed him instantly. Instead of falling, he kept running until a second shot took off his legs. Then he crawled forward, dragging himself with his arms while still firing his weapon. Corporal Song Yuna's rifle was destroyed by enemy fire. She drew a knife and continued charging. When the simulation wounded her too badly to move, she pulled the pins on all her grenades and waited for enemies to come close enough. One by one, the human soldiers fell. But they never stopped advancing. Each death brought them closer to the enemy command center. Private Kim Soo-jin used his dying teammate's body as a shield while he fired the last of his ammunition. Sergeant Park Dong-hyeon triggered his own ammunition. Pack in a suicide explosion that eliminated half the remaining enemy force. The alien delegates watched in horrified silence as 20 humans died in the most brutal way possible. But in their dying moments, they accomplished something the simulation's creators had thought impossible. They reached the enemy command center and destroyed it. Victory. Human forces, the simulation announced as the last soldier fell. The amphitheater was completely silent. Resonance of Truth's voice was barely audible. All human combatants are dead. Yes, Admiral Choi replied calmly. But they completed their mission. The objective was to defend a strategic position. They abandoned it immediately. No, Choi corrected. The objective was to stop the enemy. Advance. They did that. The method doesn't matter. But they all died. Admiral Choi looked around the amphitheater at the stunned alien faces. Death is not defeat. Giving up is defeat. Sub-Admiral Yoon Se-oh spoke from her observation post. The humans chose to sacrifice certain survival for uncertain victory. This goes against every principle of rational military doctrine. Your doctrine, Admiral Choi replied, not ours. A Keth delegate's mechanical voice cut through the silence. You cannot build a civilization on such wasteful tactics. A species that throws away its soldiers cannot survive long-term conflicts. Really? Admiral Choi smiled grimly. How long has the hegemony ruled the galaxy? 12,000 years, Resonance of Truth answered. Humanity has been fighting wars for 50,000 years. We've been doing it since before we had metal tools or written language. We've fought through ice ages and plagues and natural disasters that should have wiped us out completely. And we're still here. The Admiral walked to the center of the amphitheater, where the simulation was still showing the aftermath of the battle. 20 human bodies lay scattered across the virtual battlefield, but the enemy command center was nothing but smoking ruins. You measure success by survival rates and efficiency ratios, he continued. We measure it by whether the mission gets done. You calculate acceptable losses and retreat when the numbers don't work out. We find a way to win anyway. That's not sustainable, the Veltar representative argued, its gaseous form swirling with agitation. Isn't it? Admiral Choi asked. Your species have ruled through superior technology and overwhelming force. What happens when you meet an enemy that doesn't care about your advantages? What happens when you face someone who keeps fighting after? They're supposed to be dead? The question hung in the air like a challenge. For 12,000 years, the hegemony had maintained order through predictable rules. The strongest species dominated the weaker ones. Technology determined victory. Logic governed all decisions. Humans had just proven that none of those rules were universal laws. The third trial will be tomorrow, Resonance of Truth announced, but its voice lacked the confidence it had shown before as the delegates filed out of the amphitheater. Yoon Seo heard whispered conversations in a dozen languages. The words were different, but the meaning was the same in every tongue. Fear. For the first time in their history, the hegemony had encountered a species that made them afraid. Not afraid of losing battles or territory or resources. Afraid of what? It meant to fight an enemy that refused to lose. That night, emergency sessions were held by every species delegation. By morning, 3 species had formally requested permission to leave the Crucible early. 2 others had sent urgent messages to their home worlds, requesting immediate military reinforcements. The humans slept peacefully, unaware that their simple refusal to accept defeat had shaken the foundations of galactic civilization. Admiral Choi dreamed of Earth, where billions of humans waited to learn whether they would live as free people or die as free people. Either way, they would be free. Dr. Shin Woo-jin stood before the neural simulation chamber, knowing that he was about to face something designed to break his mind. The final trial of the hegemony's testing process was psychological warfare at its most advanced level. The fear chamber, Resonance of Truth explained, its crystal body pulsing with nervous energy, will create a neural simulation of your species' greatest terror. Most beings cannot maintain combat effectiveness when confronted with their deepest fears. Around the amphitheater, representatives from 11 alien species watched with fascination. They had all passed this test by overcoming their fears through various methods: meditation, mental conditioning, technological augmentation, or simply shutting down emotional responses entirely. What happens if I fail? Dr. Shin asked. Psychological breakdown is common, and Nexare replied matter-of-factly. Permanent mental damage occurs in approximately 30% of subjects. Death from neural shock happens in 8% of cases. Dr. Shin nodded calmly. And if I refuse to take the test, automatic assignment to the lowest servant class. Your species would become manual laborers for the rest of galactic history. I see. Dr. Shin looked around at the alien faces watching him. Some showed curiosity. Others displayed what might have been pity. None showed any real concern for his well-being. Before I begin, he said, may I ask what fears the other species faced? Resonance of Truth's light patterns shifted. That information is classified. Each species' deepest fears are kept secret to prevent psychological warfare between member races. Of course. But surely you can tell me the general categories? The crystal being hesitated, then apparently decided there was no harm in the question. Death, pain, isolation, extinction of their species, loss of status, physical helplessness. The usual range of survival-based fears. Dr. Shin smiled. Thank you. That's very helpful. How so? Because now I know you don't understand humans at all. Before Resonance of Truth could respond, Dr. Shin stepped into the neural simulation chamber. The doors sealed behind him with a soft hiss. The chamber was completely white and empty. Dr. Shin stood in the center and waited. He was a military psychologist who had studied human fear responses for 15 years. He knew what was coming would be designed to paralyze him with terror. The simulation began. Suddenly, Dr. Shin was standing in his childhood home on Earth. Everything looked exactly as he remembered it. The worn wooden floors, the family pictures on the walls, the smell of his mother's cooking drifting from the kitchen. But something was wrong. The pictures were burned and melted. Scorch marks covered the walls. Through the windows, he could see the Seoul skyline in ruins, buildings collapsed and burning. Woo-jin? His mother's voice called from the kitchen, but it sounded weak and pained. He ran toward the sound and found her lying on the floor, her body broken and bleeding. Around her were the bodies of his father, his sister, his young nephew. All dead, all killed while he was away playing with aliens in space. You weren't here, his mother whispered with her dying breath. You chose them over us. The scene shifted. Now he stood on the bridge of a hegemony warship, watching as plasma cannons fired down at Earth. Cities vanished in brilliant flashes. Oceans boiled away. The planet's surface cracked and burned until nothing remained but a dead rock orbiting a cold sun. This is what your cooperation bought. Commander Ixthival appeared beside him, mandibles clicking with satisfaction. Your species surrender. We found them useful for exactly 17 minutes. Then we decided they took up too much space. Dr. Shin watched his homeworld die and felt the simulation's neural probes searching his mind for signs of breakdown. This was what the machine expected would destroy him, helplessness in the face of ultimate loss. But instead of crumbling, Dr. Shin did something the simulation wasn't programmed to handle. He embraced the fear. Yes, he said aloud to the burning image of Earth. This could happen. The simulation paused, confused by his response. This is exactly what I'm afraid of, Dr. Shin continued, speaking to the neural probes, monitoring his thoughts. Complete helplessness while everyone I love suffers. The total failure of everything I've tried to protect. The simulation tried to intensify the horror. It showed him his nephew being tortured while calling his name. It forced him to watch his colleagues back on Earth being executed one by one. It made him experience the sensation of his own hands being used to kill the people he loved most. Through it all, Dr. Shin remained standing. More, he said. The watching aliens began to murmur among themselves. In 12,000 years of testing, no species had ever asked for more psychological torture. I know what you're trying to do, Dr. Shin said to the simulation. You want me to break down, to become paralyzed by fear, to choose self-preservation over mission completion. But you're making a fundamental error about human psychology. The simulation threw everything it had at him. It showed him torture, genocide, the heat death of the universe, infinite suffering for everyone he had ever cared about. It forced him to experience these horrors from every possible perspective, as victim, as perpetrator, as helpless observer. Dr. Shin absorbed it all and remained functional. The error, he continued, his voice steady despite the psychological assault, is assuming that fear weakens us. For humans, fear is information. It tells us what matters, what we need to protect, what we're willing to die for. Outside the simulation chamber, the alien delegates were becoming agitated. The Vorthik were clicking their mandibles rapidly. The Veltar-S gaseous forms swirled with distress. Even the emotionless Keth were displaying signs of confusion. This is unprecedented, Sub-Admiral Yunseo reported to Resonance of Truth. His neural activity is increasing, not decreasing. The fear is making him stronger. Inside the simulation, Dr. Shin faced the ultimate test. The machine created a scenario where he had to choose between saving his family or completing his mission. To protect humanity. It was designed to be an impossible choice that would paralyze any rational being. Dr. Shin looked at the simulated faces of everyone he loved, then at the weapon that could save his species. The neural probes waited for him to freeze with indecision. Instead, he picked up the weapon and saved his family and completed his mission. That's not possible, Resonance of Truth's voice echoed in the chamber. The scenario allows only one choice. Your scenario, Dr. Shin replied, not mine. Humans don't accept impossible choices. We find third options. There is no third option. There's always a third option. We just have to be willing to pay the price for it. The simulation showed him the price, his own death, the death of half. His species, centuries of suffering for the survivors. Dr. Shin nodded and paid it willingly. The neural simulation crashed. In 12,000 years of testing billions of beings from hundreds of species. The psychological warfare system had never encountered a mind that could maintain full functionality while simultaneously experiencing maximum terror and refusing to accept the limitations of reality. Dr. Shin stepped out of the chamber as the doors opened. He looked tired but completely sane. "How?" Resonance of Truth asked, its crystal body flickering with disbelief. "Practice," Dr. Shin replied. "Every human child learns to function while afraid. We're afraid of the dark, so we learn to move through it. We're afraid of falling, so we learn to climb higher. We're afraid of dying, so we learn to live fully." "But the simulation showed you your worst fears made real." "Yes, it did. And I've been preparing for those fears my entire life." "Doctor." Shin sat down heavily, the exhaustion finally showing. "Every human has. We know the people we love will die someday. We know our civilization might fall. We know the universe is vast and uncaring and full of things that want to destroy us. How can you function with such knowledge?" Dr. Shin looked up at the towering alien representatives surrounding him. "Because knowing the worst-case scenario means we can prepare for it. Fear isn't our weakness. It's our early warning system." A new voice cut through the amphitheater. Elder Vexthari, the ancient leader of the Hegemony Council, materialized through a holographic projector. The being was so old that its species had evolved beyond physical form, existing as pure consciousness within energy fields. "Dr. Shin," the elder's voice resonated with power that made the air itself vibrate. "You interest me greatly. In all my millennia of existence, I have never encountered a species that treats fear as a tool rather than an obstacle." "Every species does to some extent," Dr. Shin replied respectfully. "You just call it by different names: caution, preparation, strategic planning." "Perhaps. But we seek to eliminate fear through superior technology and overwhelming force. You embrace it and use it to exceed your natural limitations. That's one way to put it." Elder Vexthari was silent for a long moment. When it spoke again, its voice carried a note that none of the gathered aliens had ever heard before: uncertainty. "Dr. Shin, what frightens you most about this encounter?" The question caught everyone off guard. Dr. Shin considered it carefully before answering. "That you might decide we're too dangerous to live," he said honestly, "and that we might prove you right." The admission sent a ripple of shock through the assembled delegates. No species had ever openly acknowledged that they might be a threat. "To the hegemony, you consider yourselves dangerous?" Elder Vexthari asked. Commander Huang Da-Yun sat in the communications center of the human transport ship, listening to transmissions that made her blood run cold. The encrypted hegemony channels were buzzing with activity, and none of it was good news for humanity. "Admiral," she called to Choi Byung-ho, who was reviewing tactical reports at a nearby console. "You need to hear this." Admiral Choi put down his datapad and joined her at the monitoring station. Wang played back the intercepted transmission. The voice belonged to a Keth war leader, its mechanical tones devoid of emotion. "The human specimens have proven too unpredictable for integration. Recommend immediate sterilization of their home system before they can spread their instability to other worlds." A second voice, this one belonging to a Vorthic commander, clicked and buzzed in agreement. "Confirmed. Their psychological profile suggests they will never accept subjugation. Better to eliminate the threat now while they remain confined to a single star system." Admiral Choi's face remained expressionless, but Huang could see his knuckles whiten as he gripped the console. "How many species are supporting this proposal?" "At least 6, sir. Maybe 7. The Nexari seem undecided, and the Veltar are arguing for more study, but the majority appear to favor." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "A final solution." "Timeline?" "They're moving a stellar converter into position. It's a weapon that can cause a star to go supernova. If they use it on our sun, ... Huang didn't need to finish the sentence. Admiral? Choi was quiet for a long moment, staring at the tactical display showing the positions of hegemony ships around the crucible. Finally, he spoke. Get me Captain Bay Ino. Captain Bay arrived within minutes, still wearing his pilot's flight suit. He was young for his rank, barely 30, but he had earned his position through skill and an absolute fearlessness that made even veteran soldiers nervous. Sir, Bay stood at attention. Captain, I need you to volunteer for a mission that has no chance of success and no possibility of survival. Bay didn't hesitate. Yes, sir. Admiral Choi almost smiled. You don't even know what the mission is yet. Doesn't matter, sir. If you're asking me to volunteer, it means humanity needs it done. The hegemony is planning to destroy Earth by making our sun explode. They have a weapon called a stellar converter that can trigger a supernova. Your mission would be to stop it. How, sir? By flying a single fighter craft loaded with nuclear warheads directly into the converter's core and detonating them manually. Captain. Bay nodded as if this was a perfectly reasonable request. What are my chances of survival? 0. What are Earth's chances of survival if I don't go? Also 0. Then it's not really a choice, is it? Bay straightened his uniform. When do I leave? Commander Huang stared at the young pilot. Captain, you just volunteered for a suicide mission. Don't you want time to think about it? To say goodbye to your family? Bay looked at her with eyes that seemed older than his years. Commander, every human in space right now is already on a suicide mission. We're all going to die out here, one way or another. The only question is whether our deaths accomplish something worthwhile. 3 hours later, Captain Bay's fighter launched from the transport ship's small hangar bay. The craft was little more than an engine with weapons attached, barely large enough for one person. It carried 6 nuclear warheads that had been modified. For maximum explosive yield, the hegemony fleet detected the launch immediately. Warnings flooded the communication channels. Human vessel, recall your fighter immediately, or face immediate destruction, came the transmission from the Vorthic flagship. Admiral Choi responded personally. This is Admiral Choi Bong-ho of the United Earth Forces. My pilot is acting under my direct orders. Any attempt to stop him will be considered an act of war. You are in no position to threaten us, human. Your entire species numbers in the billions. We command the loyalty of trillions across 12 different star systems. Numbers don't matter, Admiral Choi replied calmly. Ask the Persians who fought at Thermopylae. Ask Napoleon's army at Stalingrad. Ask anyone who's ever tried to break the human spirit through superior numbers. On the tactical display, Captain Bay's fighter was a tiny dot racing toward the massive stellar converter. The weapon was a kilometer-long construct of crystalline formations and energy conduits, beautiful and terrible at the same time. Hegemony interceptor ships moved to block his path. Bay flew their formations like a man possessed, dodging plasma bolts and quantum disruptors with impossible precision. His fighter took hit after hit, losing armor plating and weapon systems, but it kept flying. Human pilot, came a transmission from the stellar converter's commander. You cannot possibly penetrate our defenses. Surrender now, and your death will be swift. Bay's response was broadcast on all frequencies. I'm not here to penetrate your defenses. I'm here to show you what humans do when someone threatens our family. His fighter broke through the interceptor screen, trailing fire and debris. The stellar converter's point defense systems opened fire, filling the space around it with a web of destructive energy. Any sane pilot would have turned back or ejected. Captain Bay flew straight through it. The alien defenders watched in horrified fascination as the human fighter took damage that should have destroyed it 10 times over. Pieces of the craft were literally falling off, yet it continued its attack run. His life support is failing. reported the Nexari sensor operator. His engine is about to explode. Why doesn't he eject? Because he's human, Sub-Admiral Yun-Seo whispered from her position on the Vorthic flagship. She had been studying humanity for weeks now, and she was beginning to understand something that terrified her. Captain Bay's fighter finally succumbed to the damage and began to break apart. But instead of ejecting, he did something that defied every rule of survival that the hegemony understood. He aimed the wreckage at the stellar converter's core and triggered the nuclear warheads manually. Explosion was visible from 3 star systems away. The stellar converter, a weapon that could destroy suns, was torn apart by primitive nuclear fission devices, detonated by a human who chose certain death over possible failure. In the silence that followed, Elder Vexthari's voice filled every communication channel in the fleet. Attention all hegemony forces. Stand down immediately. By order of the High Council, all hostile actions against humanity are suspended pending emergency deliberation. Admiral Choi received a private communication request an hour later. When he accepted it, Elder Vexthari's energy form appeared in his quarters. Admiral, the ancient being said, I must ask you a question that I have never asked any species. In my 12,000 years of existence. Go ahead. Will you teach us? Admiral Choi raised an eyebrow. Teach you what? How to be brave. The Elder's energy field pulsed with what might have been embarrassment. We have spent millennia perfecting the art of survival. We have weapons that can destroy stars, ships that can cross the galaxy in hours, technology that has made us nearly immortal. But we have forgotten something that your species never lost. Which is how to sacrifice for something greater than ourselves. We have become so focused on individual survival and species preservation that we have lost the ability to inspire anyone to risk their life for others. Elder Vexthari paused, and when it continued, its voice carried a note of wonder. Your Captain Bay had everything to live for. He was young, skilled, with decades of life ahead of him. Yet he threw it all away to save people he had never met and would never meet. This concept is so foreign to us that we have no word for it in any of our languages. We call it courage, Admiral Choi said simply. Courage. The Elder repeated the word as if tasting something new. We have analyzed your species' behavior patterns. Every action you have taken since first contact has been based on this principle of willing self-sacrifice for collective benefit. It is the most powerful force we have encountered in the galaxy. More powerful than your star-destroying weapons? Much more powerful. Weapons can destroy matter and energy. Courage can create something from nothing. It can turn defeat into victory, transform the weak into the strong, make the impossible merely difficult. Elder Vexthari's energy form shifted and changed, taking on patterns that seemed almost human-like. Admiral Choi, the Hegemony Council hereby extends an unprecedented offer. We do not wish to rule over humanity. We wish to learn from you. Will you accept full membership in the Hegemony as equals, not subjects, and help us remember what we have forgotten? Admiral Choi looked out the viewport at the debris field where Captain Bay had given his life to save a world he would never see again. On one condition, he said, name it. We want to build a memorial at the site where Captain Bay died. Not just for him, but for every being in the galaxy who has ever chosen to sacrifice themselves for others. And we want it to carry a simple message. What message? Admiral Choi smiled. They measured power in lasers. We measured it in courage. 6 months later, the memorial was completed. It was a simple structure by hegemony standards, just a crystalline spire that broadcast a single message across the galaxy in every known language. But around that memorial, something unprecedented began to happen. Young beings from all 12 hegemony species started arriving, asking to learn from human instructors.